You've always been the strong one, Megan. You don't need the same help Tyler does." Those words hit me like ice water as I stood in my parents' living room, holding a cookbook that smelled faintly of mildew and had someone else's handwritten notes in the margins. The price sticker from a thrift store was still visible on the back cover, $1.50. Meanwhile, my younger brother Tyler was across the room, tears streaming down his face as he embraced our father, a ceremonial check for $95,000 clutched in his trembling hands. The check that would serve as the down payment for his first home. The check that represented everything my parents believed he deserved, and I apparently did not. My name is Megan Holloway. I am 34 years old. I work as a pediatric physical therapist at a children's hospital in Minneapolis, where I spend my days helping kids learn to walk again after accidents and surgeries and illnesses that tried to steal their futures. I chose this career because I wanted to make a difference, because I believed in the value of hard work and compassion, and showing up for people who needed help. I thought those values came from my parents. I thought they had raised me to believe that effort mattered, that dedication would be rewarded, that family meant supporting each other through everything. I was wrong about where those values came from, and I was devastatingly wrong about what family meant to the people who had raised me. The scene unfolding in front of me was not a surprise. Not really. The pattern had been established decades ago, carved so deeply into the bedrock of our family that I had stopped questioning it years before. But something about this particular moment, this particular disparity, finally cracked the foundation I had been standing on my entire life. A used cookbook that cost less than a cup of coffee. A check for nearly 6 figures. Both presented on the same Christmas morning, to siblings standing 3 feet apart, by parents who genuinely believed they were treating us fairly. Fair. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I looked down at the cookbook in my hands, its pages yellowed with age, its spine cracked from use by someone who was not me and would never be me. Then I looked at my brother, at the check that would change his life, at the joy radiating from every pore of his being, and I made a decision that would change everything. To understand why that moment broke me, you have to understand the history. The decades of disparity that had led to this single, crystallizing instant. My parents, Richard and Donna Holloway, were high school sweethearts who married young and built their lives around traditional values and carefully constructed appearances. My father worked his way up through a manufacturing company to become a regional manager, while my mother stayed home to raise children and maintain the household that was supposed to be the center of our family universe. Tyler arrived when I was 6 years old, a squalling bundle of need that immediately consumed every ounce of attention my parents had to offer. I remember standing in the doorway of the nursery, watching my mother rock him for hours, singing lullabies she had never sung to me, her face soft with a devotion I had never seen directed my way. At 6 years old, I told myself it was because he was a baby and babies needed more attention. I told myself that once he grew up, things would balance out, that there was plenty of love to go around and I just needed to be patient. I waited 28 years for that balance to arrive. It never did. Tyler was the baby, which meant he was fragile. Tyler was a boy, which meant he needed different kinds of support. Tyler struggled in school, which meant he required extra resources and encouragement. Tyler was sensitive, which meant he could not handle the same expectations that were placed on me. Every excuse, every justification, every explanation pointed in the same direction. Tyler deserved more, and I should be grateful for whatever I received. The pattern established itself early and never wavered. When I was 8 and Tyler was 2, I asked for a bicycle for my birthday. I received a used one from a garage sale, its paint chipped and its chain rusty, the previous owner's name still scratched into the frame from some long-ago attempt at theft prevention. Meanwhile, Tyler got a brand new tricycle that same week because he had pointed at one in a store and cried. The tricycle cost 3 times what my used bike had cost. No one seemed to notice the discrepancy, or if they did, no one thought it worth mentioning. When I was 10 and Tyler was 4, I made my first attempt at talking to my mother about the difference in how we were treated. I had noticed that Tyler's bedroom was filled with new toys, while mine still contained the same furniture and decorations from when I was a toddler. I asked, as carefully as a 10-year-old could, why Tyler seemed to get more stuff than me. My mother had knelt down, taken my hands in hers, and spoken in that patient tone adults use when they believe they are being reasonable with unreasonable children. Tyler is younger than you, sweetie. He needs more stimulation and enrichment at his age. You're such a big girl now, so independent and capable. You don't need the same things he does. I accepted that explanation at the time. What else could I do? I was 10 years old, and my mother was the authority on how the world worked. If she said the disparity was normal, then it must be normal. If she said I did not need what Tyler needed, then I must not need it. But the explanation never changed, even as we both grew older. Tyler always needed more, and I always needed less, and the gap between our treatments only widened with each passing year. When I was 12 and Tyler was 6, I made the honor roll for the first time. I had worked incredibly hard for those grades, staying up late to study, sacrificing time with friends to complete extra credit assignments, pushing myself to excel in a way that I hoped would finally earn my parents' attention and pride. My parents acknowledged it with a brief, "good job" at dinner, then spent the remaining 45 minutes discussing Tyler's soccer game, which his team had lost 8-2. They analyzed his performance, praised his effort, made plans to sign him up for additional coaching. My honor roll achievement was never mentioned again. I tried to tell myself it did not matter, that grades were their own reward, that I should not need external validation, that I was above such petty concerns as parental recognition. But the hurt lodged somewhere deep in my chest and never quite went away. When I was 14 and Tyler was 8, I developed a serious interest in playing the violin. I had heard a professional violinist perform at a school assembly and felt something ignite inside me, a passion I had never experienced before. I researched instruments, found a reasonably priced used violin at a music shop, and presented my case to my parents with all the logic and evidence a 14-year-old could muster. My mother looked at the price tag, sighed dramatically, and told me that money was tight and we simply could not afford musical instruments right now. She suggested I focus on activities that did not require expensive equipment. 2 weeks later, Tyler announced he wanted to play drums. My parents bought him a complete drum set within the month, spent thousands on lessons over the following years, and proudly attended every one of his recitals, even though he never progressed beyond the most basic level of competence. I never brought up the violin again. But I never forgot either. When I was 16 and Tyler was 10, I got my first job at a local ice cream shop, saving every penny for a car that would give me freedom and independence. I worked evenings and weekends, missed social events with friends, built up a savings account dollar by dollar through minimum wage labor. My parents bought Tyler a gaming system that cost more than 2 months of my wages because he was going through a hard time after his best friend moved away. The same week, they told me they could not contribute anything toward my car fund because finances were stretched too thin. I bought my own car eventually, a used sedan with over 100,000 miles that broke down constantly but was mine, earned through my own effort. Tyler never had to work for anything. His needs were always met before they became needs, anticipated and fulfilled with the devotion of parents who seemed to believe their son was made of more precious material than their daughter. When I was 18 and Tyler was 12, I graduated high school as salutatorian, second in my class of 400 students. I had earned academic scholarships that would cover most of my college tuition, had been accepted to excellent universities, had achieved everything that should have made my parents burst with pride. My parents attended the ceremony but left early because Tyler had a stomachache and wanted to go home. I walked across that stage and received my diploma, while the seats where my family should have been sitting remained conspicuously empty. The college years brought new variations on the same theme. I worked 3 jobs to pay my tuition, living on ramen noodles and caffeine, because my parents told me they simply could not afford to help with my education. The money was tight, they explained. They were doing the best they could. I needed to learn self-reliance. Meanwhile, Tyler's every whim was funded without question. New clothes for each school year. Electronics whenever the latest model was released. A car for his 16th birthday, the same year I was sleeping 4 hours a night to juggle classes and work shifts. His college tuition paid in full, plus spending money, plus an apartment near campus because dorm life was too stressful for his sensitive nature. When I graduated from my physical therapy program with honors and a job offer at a prestigious children's hospital, my mother's response was a distracted congratulations, followed by a 20-minute monologue about Tyler's struggle to choose a major. He had changed direction 3 times already and was now considering taking the semester off to find himself. Finding himself apparently required a trip to Europe, funded entirely by our parents, while I was still paying off student loans from an education they had refused to help finance. I cataloged these injustices not because I wanted to be bitter, but because the pattern was so overwhelming that my brain automatically tracked every data point. Like a scientist studying a phenomenon she could not explain, I documented each instance of favoritism, each excuse offered, each time the rules were different for me than they were for Tyler. By the time I reached my 30s, the file was thick enough to fill volumes. And still, I kept coming back. Still, I showed up for every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering where I would be treated like a supporting character in Tyler's story. I told myself I was being the bigger person. I told myself that family was important, that relationships required work, that love meant showing up even when it hurt. I told myself that, someday, somehow, my parents would see what they had been doing and make it right. That Christmas morning, standing in my parents' living room with a thrift store cookbook in my hands, I finally stopped telling myself lies. The morning had started with the usual choreography of holiday dysfunction. I arrived at my parents' house the night before, driving 4 hours from Minneapolis through light snow, my car loaded with carefully chosen gifts that I had spent weeks selecting and wrapping. For my mother, I had bought a beautiful cashmere scarf in her favorite shade of blue, along with a gift card to the spa she always talked about visiting. For my father, I had found a rare first edition of his favorite author's debut novel, something he had mentioned wanting for years. For Tyler, I had put together a basket of gourmet foods and craft beers, the kind of thoughtful assortment that showed I had paid attention to his interests, even when he barely acknowledged mine. I had spent nearly $400 on gifts for my family. Not because I could easily afford it, but because I still harbored some desperate hope that if I just gave enough, tried hard enough, loved big enough, they would finally see me. The gift exchange happened after breakfast, as it always did, with my mother orchestrating the proceedings like a conductor leading an invisible symphony. She handed out presents in a specific order, saving the best for last in a way that was designed to build anticipation and drama. My gifts were well received, at least on the surface. My mother admired the scarf and promised to use the spa gift card soon. My father seemed genuinely pleased by the book, handling it with the reverence of a true collector. Tyler barely glanced at his basket before setting it aside, his attention already fixed on the pile of wrapped boxes that clearly contained something more exciting. Then it was time for me to receive my gifts. My father handed me a small package wrapped in newspaper, recycled from yesterday's edition, the ink still fresh enough to smudge on my fingers. I opened it carefully, trying to maintain the cheerful expression I had worn like armor for decades. Inside was the cookbook, a used cookbook, obviously purchased from a thrift store or estate sale, its pages stained with the cooking experiments of some stranger whose name was written in faded pencil on the inside cover. Margaret, it said, 1987. We know how much you love to cook, my mother said, her voice bright with manufactured enthusiasm. When we saw this at the second-hand shop, we thought of you immediately. I turned the book over in my hands, looking at the $1.50 sticker that no one had bothered to remove. The spine was cracked in 3 places. Several pages were dog-eared. A recipe for meatloaf was circled in red pen with the note, Richard's favorite, written beside it, presumably by the mysterious Margaret whose cooking legacy I had now inherited. Thank you, I said, because what else was there to say? It's very thoughtful. The words tasted like lies, but I had been speaking this language for so long that fluency came automatically. I set the cookbook aside and prepared myself for the main event, the moment when Tyler would receive whatever elaborate gift my parents had been planning for months. I was not prepared for a $95,000 check. My father stood up with ceremonial gravity, reaching into his jacket pocket to retrieve an envelope that had clearly been positioned there for maximum dramatic effect. He crossed the room to where Tyler sat, placed a hand on his shoulder, and spoke in a voice thick with emotion. "Tyler, your mother and I have been talking for a long time about how we could help you take the next step in your life. You've worked so hard and accomplished so much, and we want to make sure you have the foundation you need to build your future." I watched Tyler's face transform from curiosity to confusion to disbelief as he opened the envelope and saw the check inside. His hands shook as he read the number. $95,000. Enough for a down payment on a house in the neighborhood he had been admiring. Enough to change his life overnight. "We're so proud of you, son," my father continued, his eyes wet with tears. "You deserve this." Tyler broke down completely, sobbing with joy as he embraced our father, then our mother, then our father again. The room filled with their celebration, their shared happiness, their perfect family moment that somehow did not include me at all. I sat frozen on the couch, the used cookbook still in my lap, watching my parents give my brother nearly 6 figures while I clutched a thrift store find that cost less than the wrapping paper on Tyler's other gifts. And then my mother turned to me with that familiar, patronizing smile. The one she always wore when she was about to explain why the obvious inequality was actually completely fair. "You've always been the strong one, Megan. You don't need the same help Tyler does. You've built such a wonderful life for yourself. We knew you'd understand." I stared at her, searching for any sign that she recognized the cruelty in her words, the audacity of the comparison, the decades of disparity that had led to this moment. But her expression held only the serene confidence of someone who genuinely believed she was being reasonable. Something inside me, something that had been stretched thin for 34 years, finally snapped. The silence that followed my mother's words lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, could feel the blood rushing to my face, could sense the exact moment when my lifelong tolerance finally reached its breaking point. "Understand?" The word came out quiet, almost calm, but there was something underneath it that made everyone in the room go still. "You want me to understand why Tyler gets a check for $95,000 and I get a used cookbook from a thrift store?" My mother's smile flickered, just slightly. "Megan, don't make this into something it's not. Your father and I have always tried to treat you children fairly, based on your individual needs." My individual needs. I heard my voice rising, but could not seem to stop it. What about my need for help with college? What about my need for support when I was working 3 jobs to pay tuition you refused to help with? What about my need to be seen as something other than the child who doesn't require investment? Tyler was staring at me now, the check still clutched in his hands, his earlier joy replaced by confusion and the beginnings of indignation. "Megan, come on, Mom and Dad are just trying to help me get started in life. Why do you have to make everything about you?" The irony of that accusation, coming from the person who had made everything about himself for his entire existence, nearly made me laugh out loud. Instead, I felt something cold and clear settle into my chest, replacing the hot anger with a calm I had never experienced before. I stood up slowly, setting the cookbook on the coffee table with careful deliberation. The movement seemed to alarm my mother more than my raised voice had. "Where are you going?" she asked, her tone sharpening. "I'm leaving." "You can't just leave. It's Christmas. We haven't even had dinner yet." I looked at her, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in my adult life. I saw a woman who had spent 3 decades convincing herself that blatant favoritism was reasonable parenting. A woman who had watched her daughter struggle while her son thrived and told herself it was because her daughter was strong and her son was sensitive. A woman who, even in this moment, could not fathom why giving one child a used cookbook and another child a down payment on a house might be a problem. I'm not hungry, I said. And I don't think I'll be coming to family dinners anymore. My father rose from his chair, his face reddening with anger that I recognized from every time I had dared to question the family order. Now wait just a minute. You're being dramatic and ungrateful. We've given you everything we could over the years, and this is how you repay us? By throwing a tantrum because your brother got a nice gift? A nice gift? I repeated, incredulous. You gave him $95,000. You gave me a book that costs less than $2. In what universe is that remotely equivalent? It's not about the money, my mother interjected, her voice taking on the wounded tone I knew so well. It's about meeting each child's needs. Tyler needed help with a house. You already have a stable life. I have a stable life because I built it myself, without your help, without your money, without your support or your attention, or your belief in my potential. I have a stable life despite this family, not because of it. The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected them to be. My mother's face crumpled, and she reached for my father's hand as if seeking support against an attack she had not seen coming. How can you say that? She whispered. After everything we've done for you. What have you done for me, Mom, specifically? I'd love to hear one example of a time you invested in my future the way you've invested in Tyler's. The silence that followed was answer enough. I walked to the front closet where I had hung my coat the night before. I retrieved it calmly, methodically, aware that every eye in the room was fixed on my movements. Behind me, I could hear Tyler whispering something to our parents, probably reassuring them that I was just jealous, that I would calm down, that this was simply Megan being difficult as usual. If you walk out that door, my father said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury, don't expect us to welcome you back. I turned to face him one last time, my coat buttoned, my keys in my hand, my decision already made. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in years, I replied, and honestly, I think that's exactly what I need. I opened the door and stepped into the cold December air. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice rise to a scream. You're tearing this family apart. How can you be so selfish? How can you do this to us on Christmas? I kept walking. The door closed behind me, and I did not look back. The drive back to Minneapolis should have taken 4 hours, but I barely remember any of it. My hands moved on the steering wheel, my foot pressed the pedals, my eyes tracked the snow-covered highway, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I was replaying every moment of the morning. Every word spoken, every expression that crossed my parents' faces, every second of the interaction that had finally shattered my ability to pretend everything was fine. My phone buzzed continuously in my purse for the first hour. I did not look at it. I could imagine the messages without reading them. Accusations of selfishness. Demands that I return immediately. Attempts to reframe the situation so that I became the villain, and they remained the victims. I had seen this movie before. I knew how it would end if I engaged, so I didn't engage. I pulled into a rest stop about halfway home and sat in the parking lot, engine running for warmth, while I methodically blocked every member of my immediate family on my phone, my mother, my father, Tyler. One by one, their numbers disappeared from my ability to contact or be contacted by them. When it was done, I felt something I had not expected. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief, like finally setting down a weight I had been carrying for so long that I had forgotten it was even there. I arrived at my apartment around dinner time, though the concept of eating felt foreign and unnecessary. The space felt different somehow, quieter, more completely mine than it had ever felt before. I walked through the rooms, touching the furniture I had bought with my own money, looking at the art I had chosen for my own walls, remembering all the moments I had built this life without help from anyone who shared my last name. I had done this, all of this. I had created a career I was proud of, a home that felt like sanctuary, a life that had meaning and purpose and joy. And I had done it while carrying the constant weight of trying to earn love from people who had decided long ago not to give it to me. What could I accomplish without that weight? The question felt revolutionary, dangerous, exhilarating. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my couch, looking out at the city lights twinkling through my window. Somewhere out there, Families were gathered around Christmas tables, celebrating together, loving each other equally, experiencing the holiday the way it was supposed to feel. I was alone. But for the first time in my memory, alone did not feel like a punishment. It felt like a beginning. The aftermath unfolded predictably over the following days and weeks. My family's attempts to contact me escalated from texts to calls to emails to social media messages sent from accounts I had not thought to block. Each message followed the same script, the one I had heard variations of my entire life. I was being dramatic. I was being selfish. I was ruining the family over something that did not matter. Tyler was hurt by my behavior. My mother was devastated. My father was furious. Did I not understand what I was putting them through? Not once did anyone acknowledge the disparity that had caused my departure. Not once did anyone suggest that perhaps giving one child a fortune and another child a used book might have been a mistake. In their narrative, I was simply an ungrateful daughter who had overreacted to a minor slight and destroyed family unity in the process. I read the messages, eventually, when I felt strong enough to see the words without being destabilized by them. I documented them in a folder on my computer, not because I planned to use them for anything, but because I needed the evidence. I needed proof that I was not imagining the dysfunction, that the pattern I had spent decades observing was real and documented and could not be gaslit away. The flying monkeys arrived within the first week. Aunt Patricia called, her voice dripping with concern that did not quite mask the judgment underneath. Uncle Robert sent a lengthy email about the importance of family forgiveness. Cousins I barely knew reached out on social media to share their opinions about a situation they did not understand. Every single one of them had the same message. I needed to apologize, to come back, to make peace with my parents before it was too late. Not one of them questioned whether my parents might have done something to warrant my departure. Not one of them asked for my side of the story. In their minds, children did not leave their families without cause. And since cause would require admitting that my parents had done something wrong, cause simply did not exist. I was just being difficult, as I had apparently always been difficult, as I would continue to be difficult until I learned to accept my place in the family hierarchy. I did not respond to any of them. Instead, I focused on my own healing. I found a therapist who specialized in family dysfunction and began the slow, painful work of unpacking decades of emotional neglect. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Carter, a warm woman in her 50s who had seen enough family trauma to recognize the patterns in my story without me having to explain every detail. "You were the scapegoat," she told me during our second session, using a term I had heard but never applied to myself. In dysfunctional families, children are often assigned roles that serve the family system rather than the children themselves. Your brother was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, whose needs were always prioritized, and you were assigned the opposite role, the one who was expected to manage on her own, to ask for nothing, to accept whatever scraps were offered and be grateful for them. I listened to her explain the dynamics that had shaped my entire life, felt pieces clicking into place that I had never understood before. The favoritism was not random or circumstantial. It was a system, a pattern that my parents had created and maintained for reasons that had nothing to do with my worth or Tyler's worth as individuals. But why me? I asked, the question I had been carrying since childhood finally finding voice. Why was I the one who had to be strong and capable while Tyler got to be sensitive and supported? Dr. Carter was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. Often it has nothing to do with the children themselves. It can be about birth order, about gender expectations, about which child reminds the parents of aspects of themselves they dislike. Sometimes the scapegoat is simply the child who is naturally more resilient, the one the parents unconsciously realize can survive the neglect. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They treat you as if you do not need support, you learn to survive without it, and your survival becomes evidence that you never needed it in the first place. The insight hit me like a physical blow. My parents had not seen my strength as an achievement, they had used it as an excuse. Every time I succeeded without their help, every time I survived their neglect, I was proving their narrative correct. I did not need what Tyler needed. I was fine on my own. And so they gave me less, and I survived, and they gave me less again. The therapy sessions became the anchor of my week. I processed anger I had been suppressing for decades, grief for the childhood I should have had, rage at the parents who had chosen their son over their daughter in 1,000 ways large and small. I cried more in those first few months than I had cried in my entire adult life, releasing pain that had been stored in my body like poison. I also reconnected with friends I had been too exhausted to maintain while constantly managing my family's needs. Women from college who had tried to stay in touch but had been gently pushed away when I was too depleted to nurture reciprocal relationships. Colleagues who had invited me to social events I had always declined because family obligations took precedence. People who had seen something in me worth knowing, even when I could not see it myself. I explored hobbies I had abandoned, interests I had suppressed, dreams I had deferred. I started taking violin lessons, finally pursuing the passion that had been dismissed when I was 14. I joined a book club, started hiking on weekends, took a pottery class where I made terrible bowls and laughed at my own failures without any fear of judgment. The space that opened up in my life, without my family's constant presence, was staggering. I had not realized how much energy I was spending on managing their expectations, anticipating their disappointments, preparing myself for their inevitable favoritism. Without that weight, I had capacity I had never experienced before. I threw myself into my work with renewed passion. I volunteered for extra projects, mentored younger therapists, advocated for patients in ways I had been too depleted to attempt before. My supervisor noticed the change and commented on my increased energy, my sharper focus, my evident joy in work that had started to feel routine. "I don't know what happened over the holidays," she said one afternoon in February, "but whatever it was, it looks good on you." I smiled and did not explain. Some transformations are too personal for professional small talk. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, and I found myself in a place I could never have imagined the previous Christmas. The constant low-grade anxiety I had carried for years was fading, replaced by a calm I had not known I was capable of feeling. I still thought about my family. Not constantly, not obsessively, but in quiet moments when memories surfaced unbidden. The good times, because there had been some buried beneath decades of favoritism. The moments when my mother had seemed proud of me, however briefly. The times when my father had looked at me with something that might have been genuine love. But I also thought about the other moments. The Christmas I was 9 and received a single-used toy while Tyler got a room full of new ones. The birthday that was forgotten because Tyler had a soccer tournament. The graduation my parents left early because Tyler was bored. The thousands of small cuts that had accumulated over decades until I was bleeding out without anyone noticing or caring. The thing about healing from family trauma is that it does not happen in a straight line. There were days when I felt completely free, completely certain that I had made the right choice, completely at peace with my decision to walk away. And there were days when the guilt hit me like a physical blow, when I wondered if I was overreacting, if I should reach out, if maybe things could be different if I just tried harder. My therapist helped me understand that both feelings could be true simultaneously, that grief and relief could coexist, that walking away from toxic relationships was both necessary and painful, and that pretending otherwise was just another form of denial. "You're allowed to mourn the family you wished you had," she told me during one particularly difficult session. "You're allowed to miss them, even when they hurt you. But you're also allowed to protect yourself from further harm. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." The breakthrough came in May, about 5 months after I had walked out of my parents' house for the last time. I was at work, helping a 6-year-old patient practice walking with her new prosthetic leg, when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I ignored it initially, focused on the child in front of me, on the triumph in her eyes as she took one unsteady step after another. Later, during my lunch break, I opened the message. It was from Tyler. "I know you blocked me, so I'm using a friend's phone. I've been thinking a lot since Christmas. I talked to a therapist who helped me see some things I didn't want to see. I'm not asking you to forgive me or come back to family dinners or pretend everything is fine. I'm just asking if we could talk. Just us. No parents, no pressure. If you say no, I'll respect that and I won't contact you again. But I needed to at least try. I'm sorry, Megan, for more things than I knew how to see before. Tyler. I stared at the message for a long time, reading it over and over, searching for the manipulation I had learned to expect from my family. The guilt trip disguised as apology. The request that would inevitably turn into a demand. But something felt different about this message. Something in the tone, the acknowledgement that he had been wrong, the genuine offer to accept my refusal without further pressure. I did not respond immediately. I took the message to my next therapy session and talked through my feelings with someone who could help me see clearly. I considered my options, weighed the potential outcomes, protected my own healing above any obligation to give Tyler another chance. In the end, I decided to meet him, not for his sake, but for mine. I needed to know if he was truly different, or if this was just another performance designed to bring me back into the fold. I needed closure, one way or another. We met at a coffee shop halfway between Minneapolis and my parents' town, a neutral location where neither of us would have the home court advantage. Tyler arrived first, already seated at a corner table when I walked in, his expression nervous in a way I had never seen from my confident, carefree brother. He stood when he saw me, then seemed to think better of going in for a hug, settling for an awkward wave that made him look younger than his 28 years. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't." "I know. I wouldn't have blamed you if you hadn't." We ordered coffee and made stilted small talk for a few minutes, both of us circling the conversation we had actually come here to have. Finally, I set my cup down and looked at him directly. "You said you talked to a therapist. What did you learn?" Tyler took a deep breath, and I watched him struggle with words that clearly did not come easily. "I learned that I've been the favorite my whole life," he said slowly, "and that being the favorite isn't actually a good thing. It just feels that way when you're inside it." "Go on." "I learned that Mom and Dad didn't do me any favors by giving me everything and expecting nothing. I'm 28 years old, and I've never had to really work for anything. I've never had to struggle or sacrifice or figure things out on my own. I'm basically a child in an adult's body because nobody ever made me grow up." I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of tension I had not realized I was still carrying. "And?" I prompted, and I learned that while they were busy making everything easy for me, they were making everything impossibly hard for you. That the money they spent on my trips and my car and my school and now my house was money that should have gone to both of us, or neither of us. That I've been living in a fantasy where I deserved more than my own sister, and that fantasy was fed to me by people who should have known better. He paused, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup, his eyes meeting mine with a vulnerability I had never seen from him. "I'm sorry, Megan, not just for Christmas, but for all of it, for never questioning why things were so different for us, for accepting every gift and every advantage without ever wondering what you were going without so I could have more, for being so wrapped up in my own easy life that I couldn't see how hard yours was." The tears came before I could stop them. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet streams running down my cheeks as decades of pain finally found acknowledgement from someone inside the family that had caused it. "What about Mom and Dad?" I asked, my voice unsteady. Tyler's expression darkened. "They don't get it. I've tried to talk to them, but they just keep insisting that they treated us fairly based on our different needs. Mom especially. She can't hear anything that challenges her version of events." "That sounds familiar. I'm moving out," he continued. "Not into a house they paid for. I'm giving them the check back and getting an apartment I can actually afford on my own. It's going to be small and probably kind of crappy, but it'll be mine. Something I earned." "Are you sure? That's a lot of money to give up." He shrugged, but I could see the fear underneath the gesture. Fear of struggling, of failing, of facing the real world without a safety net for the first time in his life. "It's the right thing to do." I should have never accepted that check in the first place, and I definitely shouldn't keep it now that I understand what it represents. We talked for another 2 hours, unpacking years of family dynamics, sharing perspectives that had never been shared before, beginning to build something between us that might eventually feel like genuine siblinghood. It would not happen overnight. The damage was too deep and the history too painful for quick repair. But it was a start. A real start. Not the pretense of family I had been performing for decades. When we finally stood to leave, Tyler hesitated, then asked if he could hug me. I said yes, and for the first time in our lives, I felt like I was hugging my brother, rather than my competitor, my rival, the golden child who had been set above me since the day he was born. I don't know if we can ever have a real relationship with Mom and Dad, he said as we walked to our cars. But I'd like to have one with you, if you're willing to try. I'm willing to try, I said. But it's going to take time. I know, I've got time. The resolution with Tyler did not extend to my parents. In the months that followed our coffee shop conversation, I heard through Tyler that they remained firmly entrenched in their version of events. In their minds, I was the ungrateful daughter who had abandoned them over a trivial matter. In their minds, Tyler's decision to return the money was evidence of my negative influence, proof that I was toxic and destructive and determined to ruin the family. They never reached out to apologize. They never acknowledged that their decades of favoritism might have contributed to my departure. They simply rewrote history to make themselves the victims and waited for me to come crawling back. I never did. The first anniversary of my Christmas departure arrived quietly, without fanfare or drama. I spent it in my apartment with a few close friends, people who had become my chosen family over the past year. We cooked together, laughed together, exchanged gifts that were thoughtful and relatively equal. A foreign experience that still felt novel and wonderful. Tyler called to wish me happy holidays. We talked for an hour, our relationship still fragile, but growing stronger with each conversation. He had moved into his small apartment, had started a job he actually enjoyed, was learning to live within his means for the first time in his life. The transition was not easy, but he was proud of himself in a way I had never seen before. I was proud of him too. My mother sent a card that arrived the day after Christmas. The timing either deliberately pointed or merely careless. Inside was a brief message in her familiar handwriting. Missing you this holiday season. The door is always open when you're ready to be part of this family again. I read it once, noted the complete absence of accountability or acknowledgement, and placed it in the box where I kept documents of our family history. Not because I planned to respond, but because I wanted to remember. I wanted evidence that even after a year, even after losing her daughter and nearly losing her son, my mother could not bring herself to consider that she might have done something wrong. Some people are not capable of growth. Some patterns are too deeply ingrained to change. Some relationships cannot be healed because one party refuses to admit there is anything to heal. I had accepted that truth about my parents. It hurt less than I expected it to. Probably because I had been unconsciously accepting it for decades. The explicit acknowledgement was actually a relief, a permission to stop trying to fix something that was never going to be fixed. Now, 2 years after I walked out of my parents' house with nothing but a used cookbook and a lifetime of pain, I find myself in a place I could never have imagined. My career continues to thrive. I was promoted last year to lead our pediatric rehabilitation department, a position that lets me shape the care we provide and mentor the next generation of therapists. The work is demanding, but deeply fulfilling, and I approach it with energy I never had when I was constantly depleted by family dysfunction. Tyler and I have built a genuine relationship for the first time in our lives. We text regularly, meet for dinner when schedules allow, share the kind of honest conversations that siblings are supposed to have. He is becoming the brother I always wished I had, and I like to think I am becoming the sister he never knew he needed. My parents remain unchanged. They have created a narrative where I am the villain, and they have surrounded themselves with people who reinforce that story. Family gatherings happen without me. Holidays pass without my presence, and life in the Holloway household continues as if I never existed. I have made peace with that absence. I have learned that some families are simply broken in ways that cannot be repaired, and that the healthiest response is sometimes to walk away. I have discovered that family can be chosen as well as born, that love should never require you to disappear, that self-respect is worth more than any inheritance or approval or place at a Christmas table. The used cookbook still sits in a drawer in my kitchen. I keep it not as a reminder of pain, but as evidence of transformation, a marker of the moment when I finally chose myself over a family that had never chosen me. Occasionally, when I am cooking dinner in my small apartment, surrounded by the life I have built entirely on my own, I think about that Christmas morning. I think about the $1.50 price tag, the check for $95,000, the look on my mother's face when she told me I was tearing the family apart, and I smile. Because walking away from that family was not tearing anything apart. It was finally, after 34 years, putting myself back together. If you are reading this and recognizing pieces of your own story in mine, I want you to know something important. You are not crazy for noticing the inequality. You are not selfish for wanting fair treatment. You are not dramatic for being hurt by people who should have loved you better. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to build a life without the people who could never see your value. And the life you build on the other side might be better than anything you could have imagined. Mine certainly is. A few weeks ago, I was cooking dinner in my kitchen when I pulled out that old cookbook, the one that had cost $1.50 and nearly cost me my sanity. I flipped through its yellowed pages, looking at Margaret's handwritten notes, the recipes she had loved and adapted and passed on to me without ever knowing my name. For the first time, I saw it differently. Not as evidence of my parents' neglect, but as a strange kind of gift. A reminder that I had survived. A marker of the moment when I finally chose myself. I made Margaret's meatloaf that night, the one she had circled and marked as Richard's favorite. It was delicious, better than anything my mother had ever cooked for me. I raised a glass to Margaret, whoever she was, wherever she ended up, and I raised a glass to myself for finally becoming the person I was always meant to be. Some stories do not have happy endings with the family you were born into, but they can have happy endings with the family you choose, with the life you build, with the person you become when you finally stop waiting for love that was never going to arrive. This is my happy ending, and it was worth every painful step to get here.